Last year, you made the promises that began your year as a deacon. And so before the whole world, you made your promise to pray the particular prayer of the Liturgy of the Hours. It was that time that you made your commitment to celibacy for the sake of the kingdom. And you made the promise of obedience to the church, to me, and to my successors. Of those three promises made as a deacon, there's only one that gets repeated again today, the promise of obedience. So I guess that's the one we make sure that you understand, and probably the one that's really central, because it is in obedience that we make the surrender of our will to the will of God, really the heart of the spiritual life. So because of that, today I want to hold you to your promise of obedience, which you made last year, that you will make in just a minute. And in particular, I want to hold you to this promise: feed my sheep. The promise that is your response to God's call to Peter, repeated 3 times, chosen by you for this day. And so I want to make it clear that at the heart of your promise of obedience, at the heart of what it will mean for you to surrender your will to the will of God and therefore grow in holiness, is obedience to this command: feed my sheep. If you are going to be obedient to this command, then it has to start with your ongoing response to the one who gives the command, your ongoing response to Jesus himself. Because he is the one that brings you to this moment, the one who now sends you forth. He is the one who will guide and strengthen, who will speak in your heart, who will help you to recognize the sheep that are beloved to him. And so you will never fulfill this promise of obedience if you are not committed to that listening to the Lord who sends you, and to the Lord who is paving the way before you, to the Lord who will send to you the people that he wants you to feed. Now, you should also recognize that in taking up this vow of obedience today, at the day that you are ordained a priest, you, of course, will undergo this fundamental change in your very lives, that you will be conformed to Christ by the power of holy orders, so that you no longer will simply hear that voice of Christ that says, do this, and receive it as a command given to his followers. But in a very real sense, your fulfilling of this promise, your obedience, will be done as another Christ. That your ministry is not just a following of the Master, but more directly an extension of the ministry of Jesus. An extension that allows your ministry to provide the nourishment that the flock is in need of. So I want you to think about all the different ways, of course, that this can be fulfilled. Your obedience to feeding the sheep is something that will be multifaceted and will unfold in your life in ways beyond what you can even imagine. But I want to highlight a few specific parts of how you are obedient to this command of Jesus. First and foremost, you will feed the lambs of Jesus by offering them the sacraments. And as you have expressed, this is your great desire, an enormous part of your motivation to be here before the church today, and your great desire to fulfill that part of the ministry that will be given to you in the priesthood. And so providing the sacraments is really an extraordinary part of the life of the priesthood, the one that gives joy both to the minister, to the priest, and to the people who receive. And in this particular place, we can be struck by the long legacy of the sacraments being given. The fact that in this place, God chose to make the sacraments first available to his people, being ordained in this historic cathedral, this first parish in this land. And in these murals on the wall behind you, you see the ministry of the sacramental life as priests were bringing the grace of God to a people who were just beginning to hear the very life of Jesus himself. Now, you have heard me speak many times about the importance of evangelization as a need of the church today, as it is in every day. And one of the most famous quotes that is given in our time for evangelization is drawn from a number of popes ago. This quote from Evangelii Nunciandi that says, "The church exists in order to evangelize." A very striking phrase. But if you continue the rest of that line, it tells us, Pope Paul VI tells us, that evangelizing, that is to say, in order to preach and teach, to be the channel of the gift of grace, to reconcile sinners with God, and to perpetuate Christ's sacrifice in the Mass. So when we hear this reality that the church does exist to evangelize, first and foremost among our evangelizing efforts is this reconciling sinners and perpetuating the sacrifice of the Mass. It is in the sacraments that you will celebrate that the presence of Christ is made known to his people. And when their hearts awaken to the presence of Christ closer than they thought, well, then they begin to perceive the power of evangelizing. The life-changing reality of knowing that the Lord is not distant to us. And so you will feed the lambs of Christ in the very direct way of providing for them his own body and blood that he tells us is true food and true drink. And in doing so, you will not just be performing a function, you will not just be following the rubrics of how the Mass is celebrated, but you will be drawing people in to the life of Christ, to the experience of the fact that God is here and present and provides nourishment for our life of faith. And so always recognize that your obedience to Christ is fulfilled in this incredible way. We also can highlight another way that you should be obedient to this command of Christ, the basic reality of compassion for his people. You will serve his people in many ways. But I believe that it is in the reality of compassion that the priest best reflects the heart of Christ himself. Because you can do a lot of things. You can celebrate the Mass and the sacraments perfectly, but if you do not look at the people of God as beloved of God, if you are not looking at them with the compassion that reflects the heart of Christ, then it will not feed them, because the greatest hunger of humanity is the hunger for love. We must be loved. We need the continual reminder that God is the one who provides what we seek most fully, the most basic hunger. And so if you want to feed the lambs, you must approach them with this compassion. In particular, I want you to be on the lookout. I want you to pay close attention to those who consider themselves unlovable. Jesus speaks often about sheep. When he said to Peter that he must feed his sheep, he had already said that you must go in search of the one who is lost, the one who thinks that they have been forgotten, the one who feels unlovable. When you reflect the compassion of Christ in the life of that person, you are obedient to the command, obedient to the promise that you make today. Another way that you fulfill this command is in the role that you have as intercessor for the people of God, a role you have already taken up in the praying of the Liturgy of the Hours. But as a priest, you will get more and more and more people coming up to you and saying, "Father, pray for this." Take that very seriously. Bring those people that come to you before God, because in your prayer, because you are conformed to Christ by holy orders, you can connect them to the very source of nourishment. You can recognize that your prayer has power because you have been joined to Christ, because he has called you. And so when you pray for the needs that they present to you, you are bringing them to the very source of nourishment. Then, as the quote from Evangelii Nunciandi highlights, part of fulfilling the role of evangelizing, part of carrying out the work of making the sacraments available to people, is that we must preach and teach. And so you will feed the people entrusted to your care by your teaching. But I want to highlight that you have now finished these years of preparation. You have learned a great deal. But in order for a teacher to be effective, people have to want to hear what you say. And so I want to highlight the fact that if you will be obedient to the command of Christ to teach, you must first be obedient in the role of sacraments and compassion and intercession. If you are not faithful in living out these realities day in and day out, if your life as a priest is not marked by the fact that you go to Christ's people and you bring them close to Him, if you fulfill your obedience in those, then people will want to know what it is that you can teach. They will see in you this connection to Christ that draws them in so that you are in fact able to share with them what God would have you say. Jesus, in speaking about the sheep, is also very clear that His true sheep are the ones who hear His voice. So the teaching role is about reflecting the voice of Christ to the people of this place, of this time. And so when you are committed to your life of prayer, when you continue growing into the image of Christ the priest, well, then what you will teach comes from your dialogue with Jesus. It will come from the fact that the Lord speaks into your heart, and that when you are able to give voice to what you have received, when the Lord who speaks to you is also able to speak through you, then you will fulfill the command to teach, but not just in a way that conveys knowledge, but in a way that inspires a greater hunger in those that the Lord wants to feed. And so it's a great privilege that you have in coming before the Lord today. A great privilege that is the promise of obedience. So understand that this is primarily about taking up the work of Christ Himself, allowing Christ to bear fruit, to satisfy hunger, because He has chosen you in this role. In the lines that follow the command that Jesus gave to Peter, He tells Peter where this will lead. And after Peter says 3 times, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you," then He points him to His own cross. He highlights that Peter himself will lay down his life as Jesus did. And so recognize that your promise of obedience today is to follow that same path. Because regardless of how the end of your life comes, regardless of whether it comes with the cross of martyrdom or not, when you live out obedience day by day and you surrender your will to the work of Christ that He places before you, then you are dying to self and you will live the martyrdom that reflects the love of Christ and is the seed of the faith in our time. And so however you die, obedience is the pouring out of your life. And today, your life is joined to Christ. And so take to heart these words that you have chosen for this reflection on the day of your ordination. You will say in just a moment again that I promise obedience. And so as you say those words, listen to the command of the Lord and commit your obedience to Him. Feed my sheep.